Podcasting from Singapore and broadcasting all around the world. You're listening to the Ignite EdTech Podcast with Craig Kemp, created by an educator for educators and streaming to the world. Now, over to your host, Craig Kemp.
Hello and welcome to episode 124 of the Ignite EdTech Podcast. I'm your host, Craig Kemp, and I'm honored to have you join us. I continue to work with the incredibly talented Mark Quinn to improve the final audio quality of this podcast. He has his own podcast production studio that provides editing and mastering services to content creators. To connect with Mark, please see the details in the podcast notes below. A tool that has positively impacted the authentic and purposeful use of technology into classrooms and meeting rooms that I have worked in is Smart Kidz Club. Smart Kidz Club, with a Z, is a new tool in my toolbox, having just learnt about it this week and introduced it to my own two children aged 5 and 9 for their feedback. Smart Kidz Club was introduced to me this week as a great tool to support my youngest, aged 5, learn to read, and for my 9-year-old, extend her into more non-fiction content. In the past few weeks, my 5-year-old has shown and expressed interest in wanting to learn to read, so we've looked for ways to support this, and I found Smart Kidz Club. It's a library of ebooks covering a huge range of subjects, from the alphabet to dog breeds to countries of the world to science. Books for young kids focus on vocabulary building, while older kids can learn about areas of interest. There are fictional stories as well, many of which cover common themes for kids like building friendships. The books are listed by age and reading level to help kids pick out stories that are just right. Kids might choose to have the story read aloud or to read it on their own. Or, of course, a parent or sibling might like to read it to them. If kids choose to have the book read, the words are highlighted with the narration. Also, there are words kids can click on to get a definition. At the end of each book, there's at least one activity to help children think about and retain information. Some are games, like a hangman game with a snowman, while others feel like school, such as sequencing activities where kids put key scenes in order. Parents can access reports on the website with information about where kids have spent their time. It's clear that Smart Kidz Club has been developed to make reading fun and easy for parents and children. It features educational content with no access to animation, ads, videos, or games, which was really important for me as my girls get very distracted from this sort of technology. Combined with beautiful illustrations and human narration, the ebooks are deemed by researchers as just right and are exclusive to this library. So far, my girls love what they see, and I'll share more feedback in the coming weeks as we together dive a little deeper. I highly recommend that you take a look in the link in the description below, smartkidsclub.com. Last week, I shared my thoughts about creation over consumption. If you're interested in learning more, go back and listen to last week's episode. This week, I wanted to jump straight into 2 interviews. I was so inspired by these that I'm sharing both today and including them to give you a little bit extra to learn from and connect to. To learn more, connect on our social channels so we can continue to engage and share more ideas with you. Every week, I bring you a short interview with some of my edu heroes, an engaging learning experience with someone who makes a difference in education every day, with a particular focus or angle towards educational technology. This week, I had the pleasure of chatting with Damien Eversmann and Nathan Thompson. Let's have a listen to the chats. Today, I have the honor of speaking with Damien Eversmann. Damien is the Chief Architect of Education for Red Hat's North America public sector. Red Hat is the world's leading provider of enterprise open source solutions using a community-powered approach to deliver high-performing technologies. Having spent the bulk of his career working in or with the public sector, Damien is somewhat of an expert when it comes to IT in government and education. Throughout his working life, Damien has served as a developer, system administrator, development manager, enterprise architect, technology director, and now a solutions architect. Most recently, Damien has traveled around North America with Red Hat to share the news of digital transformation. Damien, it's a real pleasure to have you on the show today. Are you ready to talk about education and technology integration?
Absolutely, Craig. Let's get to it.
Thanks so much. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about your current role and what inspires you to do what you do?
Absolutely. So, like you said in your introduction, I am the chief architect for education at Red Hat. And I like to tell people that my role is really bridging the gap between the mission and the business of education and all the technologies and solutions that support it. So for me, I think what inspires me the most is seeing all of these different tools that are available to educators actually be used in the field. You know, I've sat in on a lot of courses over the years. I've seen professors and educators actually use technology to sort of take that information that they're throwing at the students constantly and turn it into knowledge. And that real transition between information and knowledge is probably one of the most inspiring things that I've seen in my life.
I love that. It's a really exciting piece to hear about because, as educators, we work day in, day out to try and ignite and inspire the learners in our classroom and those around us in the community. So it's really nice to be able to hear that, particularly from someone who comes from outside of the education space and influencing inside the education space. I'm curious to dive into data science a little bit more now. And how can data science change the educational experience for students at all levels of learning, in your opinion?
Well, I think it's important to sort of spend a moment talking about what data science is, right? When we went back to that conversation we had earlier about taking information and turning it into knowledge, and that's really what the goal of educators is. What the goal of data science is to actually take data, raw data that is crazy voluminous in nature, and turn that into information. And so data science is really sort of that first step before we get into creating knowledge from that information. There is not a single field anymore that has not been impacted by data science in some way. You know, it's not just marketing. It's not just, the hard physical and astronomical sciences anymore. I mean, there are foreign language and linguistics programs at universities right now that are using data science in the analysis of ancient texts, ancient languages that humanity has not been able to decrypt and translate. And now the tools of data science are actually helping us get insights into those. If you had told anybody 20 years ago or 30 years ago that you were going to use computers in linguistics, or you were going to use computers in social sciences, or even today, if you look at the AI that's building art, right? We talk about all the different AI solutions that are out there. Data science it's a tool that we can't do without anymore. It's helping us take the massive amounts of data that we've amassed over the long history of humanity and really turn it into information and knowledge. And if you're familiar with the pyramid, right? Everything starts as data, and from that data, you can discern information. And then by analyzing that information, you create knowledge. And by spending a lot of time working with that knowledge, you develop wisdom. And I think the entire goal of all of this is to go from that data, that down at deep at core data, and to come out with wisdom on the other end.
Yeah, very, very, very good introduction and information, I guess, around what data science is and does. And in particular for those educators listening, being able to then take that and think about what that looks like in their classroom or in their school to support learning. Let's dive into it in a little bit more detail here around the specific work that you do, Damien. What do you see as the advantages for educational programs that implement data science? And how are current institutions utilizing it now, particularly in the global K-12 space?
So coming from a software company, Red Hat, we've been using data science for a significant period of time, longer than many. And several years ago, we began developing a set of tools that we were using to help us analyze our marketing campaigns and analyze our sales strategies. And we also do a lot of work with higher ed institutions, and our director of research happened to be talking to several professors at Boston University about the tool that we had created, which we called RHODS, Red Hat OpenShift Data Science. And we had started to see it as a tool that we could market to other institutions that needed to perform data science. And these educators at Boston University looked at the tool set that we had created and were curating and said that, it's not just a data science tool, it's an education tool. And they took things like the Jupyter notebooks that we build into our roads solution and created textbooks out of it, interactive textbooks that their students were able to actually use and run different sample code and actually have hands-on experience right within the textbook. And they used a lot of the libraries that we had curated around that to help the students really understand the ability to use these data science tools at their core and not sort of just as a data analysis tool. And from that, it spiraled to a high school in the UK actually using the Roads tool for a hackathon that they held one weekend. And they were able to spin up different environments for all of the different teams of the hackathon to actually use these modern data science tools to solve some of the problems that the competition was being set up to do. It's been an amazing thing to watch the data science tool grow, because every time we think we've got the list of all of the things that it can be used for down, somebody in education comes back with a new and unique twist on the tool. And it's yet another sort of feature that we can add and say just how versatile these data science tools are.
Yeah, I think it's a really nice way to learn a little bit more about the work that you do specifically there and understand what that looks like for educators listening today as well. Let's dive into some quick fire questions, Damien. The first thing that comes to your head, and maybe a brief why, what's your favorite EdTech book or resource?
Well, you said at the beginning that I'm not in the education world. So this is going to be a little tangential to EdTech, but I think it's really important. One of my favorite books in general is The Cathedral and the Bazaar. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's a book by Eric Raymond, who is a luminary in the history of software development. On the surface, it really feels like a book that talks about lessons for building open source software, good lessons for building open source software. But as you dig into it and sort of peel back the layers, it has all of these wonderful insights about the wisdom of crowds and about sort of human interpersonal relations and how we learn from each other and how good ideas can come from the most unexpected places and how much of a tragedy it would be if we weren't listening for those good ideas.
I love that. We'll make sure the link to that is in the podcast notes as well. What's your go-to EdTech tool that the listeners need to try?
Again, it's not exactly an EdTech tool, and this one actually might be a little controversial for your listeners. But I'm going to say ChatGPT. And the reason I'm going to throw it out there, and I know that it's a bit of a pariah in some education circles, is this is a tool and a group of tools that are not going away. And if we don't embrace these tools and use them for learning, then they are going to become what everyone is, claiming they are, which is just the tool that we need to keep students from cheating. But there have been a number of articles just in the past couple of months about how teachers are embracing ChatGPT and tools like it and actually using them to help enhance education. There was one, I think it was just last week in Science News, that talked about how a teacher had come across his high school student a rough draft the student was using. And there was one paragraph in it that kind of stuck out from the rest and didn't really sound like that student's voice. And when he confronted the student admitted to using ChatGPT to help write it. And the teacher used that as a learning opportunity to say, that's great. ChatGPT can be just as good of a source as any other academic source that we use, but we have to use it in the right way and use that as an opportunity to help his students learn the ways to use research tools.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We've actually been talking about ChatGPT and AI quite a bit on this podcast lately, and I've just come off a couple of weeks of leading learning at some big conferences and events here in Asia. And one of the big conversations was, teachers aren't going to be replaced yet by AI, but those who aren't willing to learn and grow with this and integrate it into their practice to help do things like save them time will get replaced by those that will use them. And some of those conversations are really relevant, I think, in today's learning environment for our educators. Damien, very inspirational today. Lots of really cool deep diving into the world of data science and everything in between. I know the listeners are going to want to follow and connect with you. What's the best way for them to do that?
So I'm on LinkedIn, and I think I'm still the only Damien Eversmann on LinkedIn, so I'm pretty easy to find there. I'm also on Twitter, Damien Live. That's DAMIENLIVE. And finally, if you're old-fashioned like me and you just want to send me an old-fashioned email, I am Damien@redhat.com.
Damien, thank you so much for your time today. Super inspirational.
Absolutely, Craig. It's been a pleasure to be with you.
Today, I have the honor of speaking with Nathan Thompson. Nathan is the co-founder and CEO of Assessment Systems and has a tech background. Nathan's based in the US and is passionate about improving assessment and psychometrics with AI, automation, and machine learning. With the global concerns over quality education, it seems particularly relevant to discuss the viability and critical importance of employing psychometric methods, AI, and modern technology to get valid and reliable assessment results that affect subsequent decisions and interventions for all of our learners. Nathan, it's a pleasure to have you on the show today. Are you ready to talk about education and technology integration?
I am, Craig. Thank you. It's an honor to be on your show.
Awesome. Let's go. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about your current role and what inspires you to do what you do?
Okay, thanks. So currently I'm CEO at Assessment Systems, as you said. I've been there since 2008. When I came, it was just a side project at the university that my graduate professor had. And it's grown quite substantially since then as we've branched into online assessment and stronger psychometric software. Two things really inspire me to do what I do. And at a fundamental level, it's trying to make assessments fairer and smarter. And if you're a psychometrician, you say you're making the scores more reliable and more valid. And that just means that you're trying to make the assessments higher quality, because higher assessments are used to make decisions about people every day, millions of times, whether it's to hire somebody, whether it's what a teacher should teach a student next, whether it's to let somebody into a university, whether it's to certify somebody to work in a profession that they've spent 8 years studying for. There are so many different things. And now it's even branching out into more areas like medicine, where they're sending surveys to people 2 weeks after surgery, hip replacement surgery, let's say, to see if they're ready to go home. There's assessment pervades everywhere of our life because it's really designed to provide useful information about people. And we've all taken bad tests in our life, and we know that there is certainly a possibility that it's getting less than optimal information about you, and then decisions are being made about you on that less than optimal information. So I'm passionate about improving assessment for that reason. At a more lower level reason, what inspires me is that early in my career, I spent a lot of time doing copy and pasting of reports and writing command code in really old DOS software. And that's what got me into trying to apply AI and machine learning automation to make better software that allows more organizations to apply stronger psychometric science when they develop their assessments.
Yeah, that's incredible. And specifically in my context, I get to chat with school leaders and educators every day. And a lot of the stuff that I'm seeing very much is educators looking for ways to help them save time and be more accurate about the assessment data that they gather and the work that they do. So I think it's really good timing, particularly with AI and ChatGPT and the stuff that's going around at the moment, to be having this conversation, Nathan, too. I'd love to kick things off. A lot of our listeners are teachers and educators in schools. I'd love just for you to share for a brief moment a little bit about your experience in education, Nathan, and why this space interests you.
Well, both of my parents were teachers, special ed teachers to be specific. So I've been around education my entire life. And growing up, I always wanted to go in education. I originally wanted to be a social studies teacher. And it had really strong impacts when pretty good at math. But then I had some really bad math teachers my sophomore and junior year of high school. And when I was 17, I said I was never going to take any math class again. Well, I ended up getting a undergrad degree in mathematics and then a PhD in machine learning and statistics. So obviously, it had a lot to do with my teachers and not to do with the fact that I didn't actually like math. So that's really inspired me to work in the field of education.
Yeah, really exciting to hear that. And you're diving deep now into the work that you do. I'd love to know, more about this work and how it can benefit educators globally.
So the key thing that goes into assessments in the work of how they touch educators has a lot to do with providing useful information about the students, like I said. And you can have formative assessments and you can have summative assessments. So formatives are assessments that are typically given in the classroom, and there's no incentive to cheat usually, and no stakes that ride on it. Like you're not going to pass or fail because of it. It's, like something that's just to see where you are so that the teacher knows what to teach you next. On the other hand, a final exam is a summative assessment because there's a lot of stakes that ride on that. The summative assessment is useful as, a sort of final hurdle to usually bestow some kind of important decision, like this person passes or this person is qualified to work in a career. But I think that formative piece is where we can really make a lot of impact. I'm passionate about providing better tools for teachers and educators or anybody that's doing any assessment, even employment or certification, so that they can make stronger assessments and have stronger psychometric science behind them.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think particularly that research and science behind some of the decision making that happens in schools is often missed or left out. And I'd love to learn a little bit more about your thoughts on something that continues to evolve, and particularly pretty quickly at the moment, at the beginning of 2023, is I'd love to hear your thoughts on the future of technology and AI, and in particular, how educators listening can make the most of developing their skills for the future.
Sure. Well, one important thing to remember when you're talking about assessment and AI is that AI and machine learning have been around for a very long time in the field of assessment. It was before those became buzzwords, really. Years ago, I took a course on machine learning from Johns Hopkins University, a big famous university here in the U.S. And I got about 3 minutes in, and they put up a screenshot of the Wikipedia page on psychometrics as an example of really early machine learning and AI. And as in some of the original fundamental work that was done looking into the structure of intelligence and the structure of personality, trying to dissect the data and make sense of it. And that's what data scientists would call unsupervised machine learning. So some of that has been around for a very long time. Adaptive testing has been around since the 1970s, and that's using algorithms, usually machine learning-based algorithms, so that assessments are delivered in a way that personalizes it to each student in the same way that a teacher might personalize it if they were giving a question, an assessment question by question. But of course, teachers don't have time to give a question-by-question test to every single student, so the AI essentially does that for them. Current topic, of course, is ChatGPT, and I think there's a lot of ways we can utilize that. Creating content is probably the biggest one, both reading passages or similar content like that, and then the actual questions. I've worked with it, and you can tell something to ChatGPT as specific as, make me a 300-word essay on the history of Poland and then write me 10 questions about it. And you can see just how much that would save work for the teachers. Unfortunately, it's not quite up to the A game yet. Just saw some research by a friend of mine, Alan Mead at Certiverse. He had it write an exam for a certified psychometrician, because no such exam exists, and it was something that he was a subject matter expert in, so he could evaluate. The majority of the items required heavy editing, so they weren't really ready for immediate use, but it still saved him a lot of time in terms of the overall time it would take to develop a 100-item exam. And I think that's really where AI is going in terms of helping the assessment world, the creation of content.
I've taken a pause there because I get excited about the potential of this, and not just the potential of ChatGPT and AI and some of the stuff that's happening, because we're really scratching the surface of what's there at the moment. And most educators listening to this probably only know of one or two solutions in this space, but there are literally hundreds, if not thousands, doing this, as you pointed out. I'd love to know your thoughts on what this is going to look like for a teacher in a few years' time. What value add is AI going to have for a teacher in the classroom that's going to save them time and add value, or even just your advice on how can someone get into that today?
Yeah, I think it's going to become easier to use tools like that, like ChatGPT. So they're going to get piped into learning management systems, item banking systems, educational assessment platforms, whatever else tools that teachers are using, ChatGPT has built itself to have friendly APIs so that other systems can plug into it easily, so that you don't have to become an expert on ChatGPT itself. That functionality is going to end up being made available to you in the tools that you already use.
Yeah, brilliant. And that's ease of use, I think, is the exciting part of it. Let's jump into some quick fire questions, Nathan. The first thing that comes to your head, and maybe a brief why, what's your favorite EdTech book or resource?
My favorite resource is the journal Practical Assessment Research and Evaluation, which is 100% free. It was originally started probably 20 years ago by Larry Rudner, who ran the GMAT exam for a long time, but now it's hosted by the University of Massachusetts. And it's got a lot of really high-quality published articles on psychometric research, assessment, educational technology. And because it's free, it's easily accessible and easily searchable. But I also really like it because it's very practical, as it says in the title. And a lot of the psychometric journals out there are just academic curiosities. And that one is something that can really affect what's being done in the classroom or at a district level or at a state or provincial level.
Amazing. With this and everything else you've talked about and are going to talk about, all of the links are in the podcast notes below as well, so people can click through and see all of that. Nathan, what's your go-to EdTech tool that the listeners need to try?
For me, it's almost all the work I do is on my platforms. So I have a platform called FastTest, which is for developing large item banks and delivering online exams. There are some good alternatives out there as well. Some organizations might have heard of Tau. That would be another good one to evaluate. That's an open source platform that was made out of the University of Luxembourg originally, but it's something that has gotten traction within the education space.
Brilliant. What's the best way for listeners to follow and connect with you?
Best way to follow and connect with me is on LinkedIn. So my URL is LinkedIn/Nathan Thompson ASC, all one string, no dashes or anything. We'll put the link in the show notes, of course. Or on Twitter, my handle is Adaptive Testing.
Brilliant. We'll make sure those are in the podcast notes below as well. Nathan, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure being on the show.
Next week, join me for episode 125 of the Ignite EdTech Podcast, when I'm joined by Adriano De Prato. If you enjoyed today's episode, please follow us and share the podcast with your PLN and colleagues. Please remember to spend a few minutes to rate this podcast too on your podcast channel of choice, so we can reach even more educators and EdTech enthusiasts globally. Remember, you have the chance to win as well. Check out the links in the description for more, and I'll see you again next week.
If you liked today's episode, please don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss another episode. And be in the drawing to win prizes every week. If you know others that would enjoy the show, please hit that share button and brighten their day. Join us again next week for your weekly EdTech hit with @Mr. Kemp NZ. We'll see you again soon.